The ideal woman's body has changed pretty dramatically, and it's always been tied into what people are wearing. And then that's always tied into economics and wealth.
The ideal female body has been influenced by economics in many ways, such as government policies, feminist movements, social class, and media. These feminist waves of change appear and come from major economical shifts.
Around 1900, women were wearing corsets, and they had been for decades prior to this, centuries. But in around 1900, a health corset was created, and the health corset was creating a severely tightened waist, and it made women lean in this really awkward stance. So they stood almost like this, and it's called an S-bend curve. So they were like this, and with their backside protruding out, and their busts this way, and that was considered the ideal beauty. So if you look at pictures of the Gibson girl, that's the S-bend corset was creating this silhouette, and that was considered the ideal beautiful woman, the ideal beautiful body of tightly corseted waist, full hips, a full bosom. And then you fast forward into the 1920s, so only 20 years later, and the silhouette has completely changed, and the ideal woman is now being ruled by this idea of teenagers and young women in a more boyish shape.
During first wave feminism, the flapper girl developing post-World War I was no coincidence. The flapper girl rises in the 1920s right after the end of World War I. In the year of 1920, women gained the right to vote, and the ban of production, importation, transportation, and sale of alcoholic beverages marks the prohibition in the U.S. These events surge an empowering movement for women and marks a change in the ideal body for a woman as well. Because women were beginning to behave more like men, a more reckless and lively look towards life, gender roles were already changing. Women can now vote, choose who they married, drive cars, and even hold jobs that were previously solely for men from the opening of jobs during the war.
And so you went from this severely corseted hourglass figure to this straight and narrow column with no shape whatsoever, and the ideal beauty really looked more like a boy.
These events led to second wave feminism coming off of World War II with a focus on women in the workplace and sexuality. World War II caused many women to step in to take over male jobs and become the power behind the economy wheel. Rosie the Riveter becomes an ideal figure during the war and influenced women's beauty and body trends. The ideal female body started to stray from total thinness to a fuller build defining beauty. Marilyn Monroe, for example, was one of the most iconic female figures during the post-war era, known for her hourglass, curvy figure.
Yes? What is it?
I'm terribly sorry to bother you, but I forgot the key to my front door, so I had to ring your bell. I feel so silly.
The media and film industry started to push women back into their homes, but the sexual liberation of the 60s and the popularization of adolescent female weight control in post-war era became the prime components to societal changes. The ideal body of extreme thinness returned as our collective taste. Twiggy and slender became the face of magazines and advertisements. Thinness continues until the 90s of Heroin Chic and Kate Moss, which is the time period of ultimate slenderness. The 20th century marks the beginning of the acceptance of the ideal body not always being supermodel skinny and the continuation of the emphasis on physical fitness and athleticism.
The ideal American woman's body has always been that of a youthful and reproductively viable woman, while older women, particularly those past their childbearing years, were encouraged to use various beauty regimens in order to achieve this impossible youthful ideal. Features of aging, such as wrinkles or graying hair, have had a different reflection on women than they do on men. On women, these features would represent growing incompetence, whereas on men they represent maturity. This reflection on women is primarily negative, which has led to the advent of beauty regimen and cosmetic surgery to achieve a more youthful look, medicalizing aging. The medicalization of aging has produced anti-aging products and cosmetic procedures and surgeries designed to erase evidence of age so that people can pass as younger than they are. The necessity for cosmetics has been supported by ageism and sexism throughout society. This is demonstrated as midlife and older women are judged more harshly than the men of the same age for their looks and behavior. In Hollywood, women like Maggie Gyllenhaal are constantly being denied roles for being too old for their male counterparts, despite being many years younger than them. Also, women politicians such as Hillary Clinton are judged more harshly, their ability to perform in office being questioned as if they are too old, when male politicians the same age typically do not face questions of age. Even in popular culture, older women are more negatively portrayed, shown in the many jokes aimed at the old women and the roles they play, such as witches. In the 17th and 18th centuries, the use of cosmetics was primarily those that were homemade with benefits such as to cure pimples and eczema and make skin look youthful, soft, and smooth. Moving into the 19th century, there had been a moral prohibition on artificial beauty, but still, many of the elderly used them to conceal the marks of age. Only the natural beauty that included light, youthful, smooth skin was considered ideal, but the use of cosmetics to achieve the look was looked down upon. The early 20th century brought about a new shift to products stocked and sold in upscale, brand-dedicated shops, in druggist and department stores, or by licensed agents. Women such as Elizabeth Arden, Helena Rubinstein, and Madame C.J. Walker invented the concept of the commercial beauty product made in factories and mass-marketed. Benefits from the 20th century skincare included youthful, clear, supple skin. They claimed skin renewal and anti-aging properties as well. American ideals of skin health have commonly been tied to problematic ideas about race and economic class. An example is how in 1959 Mattel only made white Barbie dolls. The white, smooth skin simultaneously implanted into young girls' mind that beauty was not only a clear, youthful complexion, but one with white skin. Things like this could have contributed to how women of both light and dark skin used anti-aging products to bleach and smoothen their skin. The lightening of the skin was able to contribute to the youthful, glowing appearance, in addition to a perceived higher social standing, but simultaneously degraded darker skin tones for not being as desirable. Not only has aging contributed to a negative self-image, but it also negatively reflected one's economic class. A pale, creamy complexion and smooth white hands established one's wealth by suggesting that one did not perform manual labor or work outside in the sun. Taking care of one's skin from aging promoted not only beauty, but a higher social or economic standing. While some women accept the physical realities of aging, others believe an aged appearance should be fought against using whatever means necessary, including cosmetic surgery, to help contribute to a more beautiful, youthful look. Millions of women engage in cosmetic work, while also relaying the importance of portraying a natural look through their beauty practices. Without the use of cosmetic surgery, social invisibility arises from the acquisition of visible signs of aging and compels women to make their chronological ages imperceptible through the use of beauty work. Not only do American beauty standards regarding aging negatively impact one's own self-image, but it also impacts women's relationships with each other across the lifespan. Aging has become medicalized throughout American history, and because of this, medical terms target female populations using scientific language, fixing aesthetic flaws and illnesses by offering medical professional help and helping to defy the aging process. The natural process of aging has become something easily fixed with a little professional help. Marketing cosmetic work in this way has contributed to the idea that aging is something that needs to be apprehended. While the beauty ideal has remained focused on youth, the different ways to achieve this look have developed and changed throughout American history. American culture's obsession with appearing youthful is demonstrated through the growing number of beauty regimens aimed at anti-aging and cosmetic surgeries.
It may have been difficult for women in general to fit an ideal body image throughout American history, but for black women, that struggle has been even more difficult. Even though there has been much progress in the past few decades in the ideal black female body, largely thanks to more positive examples in the media, elements of the struggle to define the ideal body remain today. Throughout American history, black women have had three negative body images that define them: the Jezebel, the Mammy, and the Sapphire. The Mammy image, which has traditionally had an African-American woman with darker skin portrayed as a domestic servant, has particularly affected African-American women's perceptions of their beauty. This was especially true in the early 20th century. As Elise Johnson McDougald wrote in 1925, a black woman of that time realizes that the ideas of beauty built up in the fine arts exclude her almost entirely. Instead, the grotesque Aunt Jemimas of the streetcar advertisements proclaim only an ability to serve, without grace or loveliness. Black women who wanted to be seen as beautiful usually tried to do so by following models set by white society. Historically, the African American whose skin is lighter than their peers has enjoyed more advantages, economically and socially, than those with darker skin. A series of skin lightening products were on the market throughout the 20th century, with one 1944 ad for skin lightening cream even saying that lightening your skin could make you lovelier. Additionally, African American women in the early 20th century, following another trend in mainstream society, began arguing that fat was a bad thing and that doing exercise could make one's beauty increase. For many years, a black female could only fit into an ideal by trying to fit white ideals of body image, and even this might not succeed as hoped. Since then, much has changed. Skin lightening cream fell out of favor with the rise of the Black is Beautiful movement in the early 1970s, which aimed to showcase natural black beauty. Because of movements like this, today we may be moving toward an era in which beauty ideals no longer matter, as we become more accepting of others' unique body images. That said, elements of the past remain today. In one study of college-age black women, what body images they accepted depended on whether or not they had grown up near white or black communities. Additionally, some still feel that the only body that is talked about favorably is a Nicki Minaj body, that exaggerated Coke bottle video girl look. Others felt that the perceptions depended on where they lived. In short, from the early 20th century onward, black women had begun developing their own ideal body images after a period of trying to accommodate to white ideals. However, despite this progress, elements of the struggle to define black body images remain today. Thus, for every step forward, more remains to be
So
done.
I think it's changed to be more inclusive. We now see different fashion brands have expanded their lines to include larger sizes. We see positive images in TV shows. They're more diverse as to what we see. We're not seeing just Caucasian women. There is a lot more diversity, all shapes and sizes and colors.
From colonial times to present day, the perception of the ideal American woman's body has greatly changed in regard to clothing. Women changed their bodies to fit clothing, not the clothing to fit their bodies, and the same clothing was advertised to many different races. Oftentimes, the fit of the clothing changed as the ideal body shape evolved through the decades.
So women didn't really work in the 19th century, and so their clothing reflected their husband's wealth. And so when you look at like the 1830s and 40s, women were wearing corsets. They were wearing layers and layers and layers of petticoats to create this bell-shaped silhouette of this big, full skirt. And that was a sign of the ideal woman who was reflecting her husband's status in society, because the more petticoats she had, the more volume to her dress basically made it more difficult for her to do work, to walk, things like that.
While the hourglass shape in women's fashion demonstrated their role in society, women also wore long sleeve and full-length dresses to promote modesty. This era of fashion later evolved into the Gibson girl, who still occasionally used the corset but also strived for rounded shoulders and a smooth neck. This was the time of the shirtwaist crave, which was started by Paris designer Gabrielle Chanel.
Fast forward into the 1920s, so only 20 years later, and the silhouette has completely changed, and the ideal woman is now being ruled by this idea of teenagers and young women in a more boyish shape. So clothing in the 20s hung loosely from the shoulders. Women were wearing bust confiners to flatten their chests. They were wearing, the corset had gone away and it had basically been replaced by the start of the girdle, which moved further down and just flattened the hips as well. And so you went from this severely corseted hourglass figure to this straight and narrow column with no shape whatsoever. And the ideal beauty really looked more like a boy. And then you fast forward 10 years later into the 1930s, and all of a sudden it's changed again, and the ideal woman's body is now tall and elegant, broad-shouldered, thin, so it kind of fluctuates up and down.
The middle of the 20th century brought with it the curvy pinup girl. Women were under less pressure for being slim, so during this time, women were larger. They also wore less clothing due to the over-sexualization of women during this time. From the 1960s to the new century, women's bodies changed to looking sickly thin. Women thought the heroin chic look was healthy and good-looking, which caused an influx in shaming the body types of the previous decades.
In the last, say 30 years, the ideal body shape has changed kind of dramatically. So in the 80s, when we started having supermodels, they were actually relatively normal-sized women. They were healthy, I guess I should say. And the average supermodel in the 80s was a size 4 or a size 6. Now the average supermodel is like a size 0, and a size 4 or size 6 is considered plus size in the industry for a model. And the average woman in America is a size 12. So there's a definite difference between what we see and what is reality.
Throughout time, body shapes and the fashion that corresponds with it has greatly fluctuated. In the 21st century, we have thankfully moved toward more comfortable forms of fashion and are more accepting of various body images, no matter the size or shape of the one wearing the fashion of today.